Hello everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube. This is going to be my final Mandalorian review of this season. So this is the review of Season 2, Episode 8, Chapter 16, The Rescue. It's always a real mouthful, that. Yeah, so we've made it to the end of this particular season anyway, of which I'm sure there'll be more. Yeah, don't you just hate those episodes when nothing happens? But no, everything happened in this episode. I mean, this episode we it's a rare one because we knew exactly what it was going to be going in. Basically, like we knew what was going to happen. It's about them, and obviously spoilers. I'll put this in the title, but spoilers, massive spoilers. If you're on the internet and you haven't seen this episode yet, then I don't know what you're doing. Um, but yeah, pretty yeah. We knew it was going to be going in. We knew it's going to be Mando and his team rescuing the child. And it was just a case of getting there and getting going because there's a few bits to set it all up, and then once they get to the ship, that's it. Everything goes off crazy from there. I I've said this before, but um, again, I don't really have any gripes with anything on this show. I'm happy with whatever they give me, and I've said like sometimes I prefer it if there's certain things done a certain way. But again, if I say anything like that, it's not really a criticism. They can do whatever they want, and I'll be happy with it. I do slightly dislike Boba Fett being relegated to sidekick because they literally said that in this episode. Like Sasha Banks calls him a sidekick, and then he gets them to he's their only means of transport now. He gets them to the enemy ship, and then he just buggers off, and that's it. And it's like you want to keep the galaxy's greatest bounty hunter until this point around because he's pretty handy to have in a fight. But whatever. But yeah, he had some cool lines with some of the other Mandos and that because they don't really respect him. There's a few clone jokes in there. There was a lot of like Star Wars swearing and Star Wars phrases in this one. Like they had a few lines where it's like, oh, you're a da 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 da, like and then just Star Wars words that you can't really understand. And I think um, Cara Dune said "dang ferret," which is a Star Wars swear word that Mando said last week. And at some point, someone says "McClunky," which is a whole thing which you can look up if you care. But yeah, the um, the episode gets going, and we get to they mention again about the lightsabers or the dark saber and Beskar, which they'd already established, and it kind of seemed a bit weird. They went, by the way, audience, dark saber can't cut through Beskar. And it's like, yeah, well, you showed us that. You don't need to tell us it, but whatever. It's just filling in the gaps. Yeah. So after the crash landing, the one of the real episode highlights was the Dark Troopers. We've only seen them do a little bit up until now, and we've seen them before in other Star Wars medium if you're familiar with it. But they're new to this show really. And I felt like all they were very Terminator-esque in a very deliberate way. Like there was no, I don't think there was any trying to hide that they're the way they are as a homage to the Terminator, and pretty much everything that the music when they're about and kind of like the way they move and the close ups of their face and their eyes and stuff like that. It was all very Terminator. I found they moved in like a really kind of like almost stop motion kind of way. Like, and again, I don't mean that in a negative way. It looked a bit funny in places, but I really like that because again, it reminded me of the Terminator, like particularly the end of the first Terminator when it goes all stop motion. It looks a bit. It's the only one of the very few parts of the film that looks slightly dated, but not in a bad way. Like I quite like that. I feel like that was done intentionally as well. But yeah, also I liked that the Mando was separated from the rest of his crew, and the other people on the ship were all the female characters, but they didn't make a big deal about it. It was just that's just what it was. Like it wasn't like the end game scene, Avengers Endgame, the she's got help scene, which people complain about. But I don't really care. But like it was just, oh yeah, these four characters are women, and that's it. And they're all really really badass, which was cool. Yeah, Kara and Fennec teaming up is still really cool. They'll probably get like their own series. Everyone's getting a series now, aren't they? So why not? Um, but I liked Mando going off and confronting Moff Gideon. I always go and call him Gus because that's what you're doing. Because it's Giancarlo Esposito doing a lighter version of his Gus character, which I've said before. But again, that's fine. He's clearly having fun, so why not? Um, and I like the bit where they kind of made a deal. He was like, "Look, I don't care about you. Just and like I'll just take your baby and get off my ship." And then Amanda was like, "Yeah, I don't care about the dark saber. Just give me my baby and I'll be gone." And I quite like the idea of that. Obviously, he's going to turn on him, but I kind of like the idea of Mando just only really caring about the child and not really caring about the deal that he made with Bo-Katan. Because Bo-Katan hasn't really been shown a lot in this, but she's not a particularly nice person. She's very much about herself and about um climbing to the throne of Mandalore. Like if you've seen her in Clone Wars, she's pretty. Her sister was the the lighter of the family sort of thing. But that it is what it is. Mandalorians don't tend to mess around. But yeah, I like the whole thing with him and Gus and the sword fight, Gus Gideon, and the spear versus the dark saber, which we knew was coming as soon as we heard Beskar's spear in episode 5. I liked how the spear lit up or kind of got hot when he hit it with the dark saber, and he defeated him pretty handily. But before that, obviously, we had the Dark Trooper smashing Mando's helmet in almost, and like just proper their main weapon is like Rock'em Sock'em robots. So they just keep doing that, and which it works. But yeah, that was all good. And then obviously the big part of the episode, which I've seen spark some debate, is there was always debate from when they said about a Jedi might sense Grogu's presence and come and find him. And the two big ones were that people were speculating. Actually, I'll go through all of them. Was Ezra Bridger from the Rebels series, which would be great and would line up considering Ahsoka's in there, and obviously she mentioned Thrawn. So if you've seen Rebels, you kind of know what I'm talking about. If not, it doesn't matter. But then that's the thing. I think a lot of people watching The Mandalorian wouldn't have seen the animated stuff, which is fine when they introduce the characters and you just they are who they are in this show. But I think if you brought in someone like Ezra for that big moment, it wouldn't really have an impact for a lot of the audience. It would for people like me. Like I'd love it, but for a lot of people, they just be like, "Who's this random guy who's just a Jedi we've never heard of before?" So, and some people say Cal Kestis from the Fallen Order Jedi Fallen Order game, which again, I think even fewer people would be familiar with that. So I think that would have been a bit of a whatever. And I saw a lot of people saying Mace Windu, which I've always thought was just the stupidest thing. Like I don't mind Mace Windu, but I mean he's not really that important. Like it's like, and again, it would just be kind of like, oh, he's really old. I'm not saying Samuel Jackson's really old because he's not that old, but by this point in the time, like Mace Windu, despite also being dead, but hey, it's Star Wars, that doesn't really matter. He would be a very very old man. So I don't know why that's a thing. Like he wasn't that great a character in the first place. It was just Samuel Jackson being himself, which is great, but it is what it is. But yeah, so I think Luke Skywalker was the only option really, which is what happened. As soon as you saw that X-wing, you were like, bam, there it is. And Kara's line was great with oh, just one X-wing, oh great, and it was like, oh no, and the music tones and the way it moved in quite quietly and slowly, and they didn't say anything, was absolutely perfect. And it kind of, you pieced it together, like you saw I mean, you knew who it was to start with. You saw the cloak and the green saber, which would have been in that at that time. And then for me, it was confirmed when you saw the black glove on his hand. It was like, yeah, it's definitely Luke. And like I've said before, like I think this show does a good job of balancing old stuff and characters that we know with new stuff that they've established. And I think this was probably almost a little bit too far in the bringing back old characters. And again, I'm not saying that as a criticism. I mean, because I really enjoyed it, so I'm not going to complain about something that made me happy. So why bother? But like at the same time, I do like it when the show is just its own thing, and I want it to create its own moments without having to rely on older characters. Like for the most part, this show's done a great job on introducing these new characters and building them up for to be their own thing. Like which is really cool. And but then things like this are fine. Like if they bring this in every now and then, that's all well and good. Like I say, it made me happy, so I'm not going to complain. Um, and like I've seen people complain about it, but it's and like the Luke's face as well, because it's CGI and that, but it was fine. That technology is still quite a way off to make it look lifelike, but it's not a human face, and that's obviously quite hard to replicate. But it was good enough. I think if they'd have cast a different actor than who just looks like him, like Sebastian Stan is the name you hear a lot, who it would work, but unless we knew that beforehand, I think it'd be a bit distracting for it to be a different person, because then you kind of go, oh, is that him or not? But it worked for me. But yeah, yeah, I really enjoyed that moment, and it was a really emotional ending with obviously Mando taking his helmet off and saying goodbye to Grogu for now, which was really really sad. And I literally almost posted online the day before this episode aired saying I know there's going to be a moment at some point when Mando takes his helmet off and Grogu touches his face, which is exactly what happened in this episode. Like I knew it was coming, but I thought it would be another couple of series away. But it was perfectly done, and I like that they had Mando take his helmet off the episode before, so he'd be a bit less reluctant to take it off in this. It was just kind of like, do you know what, I've got to do it, and people have seen me now, and that's just the way, no pun intended. Um, but yeah, and I really like Pedro Pascal as an actor. Like the seriousness of this whole moment when we hardly see his face, and then that was really well done. I think overall it was a good series. I think for me personally, there probably was a little bit too much of introducing already established characters rather than sort of just creating their own thing. But again, I still enjoyed it, so that's not, well, it is what it is. I think my favorite episode was probably last week's episode, with the Bill Burr episode, just because that was about a character who's completely new and they've made their own thing, and that was just kind of a standalone story, which I quite like. But again, like I'm saying, it's not a criticism at all. I do hope as it goes forward, it does become just its own thing on its own. They keep these characters going, because then they become as beloved as some of the older characters. Not not quite in the same level, but to like fans who have stuck with them. So it's but yeah, that is my review of the season finale, The Mandalorian season 2. But yeah, I'm sure it won't be long before we get another Marvel and Star Wars series. I think it's WandaVision in January, so if people are interested, I'll do some reviews of that as well, which I'm looking forward to. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. Please leave a like, please subscribe, and I will speak to you all soon. Thank you very much.